In this video I'm going to be comparing the £699 14 to 28mm Panasonic ultra-wide zoom against the £1,500 16 to 35 f4 Pro. I'm going to ask the question, can the 16 to 35 f4 Pro justify being twice the price of the 14 to 28? Now I've got something of a confession. I used to be an ultra-wide junkie. I used to use ultra-wide zooms all the time for landscape photography. Honestly, it was my go-to was always my 17 to 40 or my 16 to 35 on my Canon. And then as I went to Fuji, I got myself the 14mm, so getting a little bit narrow, that was equivalent to 21mm. And then after that, when I went to Nikon, and then Sony after that, I started really working just around for the 24 to 105 zoom range, and I found that was actually what I preferred, and it's still what I prefer. So really, I don't use these kind of lenses that much for landscape photography. However, I do use them for property photography. And to be honest, it's quite essential that I own one of these lenses for property photography alone. At the moment, I own the 16 to 35 f4 Pro, which is an incredible lens, but it did cost £1,500. So you can imagine my reaction when Panasonic released a lens which was half the price, but still wider and lighter. You know, really, from the go, it was something I was going to have to try. And finally, I have the two in my hands and it's time to make a decision. So first of all, a big thank you to my friends at the First and Last Brewery for allowing me to shoot this video here and for allowing me to take some comparison shots using the two lenses of the brewery. Now, I'm kicking off with internal property shots essentially because this is what I'm going to be using these lenses for, and I think this is the sort of market it probably does really appeal to. So as you can see, jump into this comparison shot inside the brewery. The 14mm is nice and wide. In particular, keep an eye on the hose as we now go to the 16mm shot, and you can see the difference that extra 2mm makes. And you know, it's not huge, but it's enough to get more in. Now I know for a fact that if I'm doing a property job, that the extra 2mm of the 40mm lens will be of real benefit. But as I said, I don't tend to take these lenses out when I'm shooting landscape photography, but that's mainly because of the weight and size. Now, whilst the 16 to 35 f4 Pro is relatively compact for what it is, and it does weigh only 500 grams, that's still 500 grams, which is approximately 150 grams more than the 14 to 28, which is also smaller, which means it can fit in my bag easier and it weighs a little bit less. So I'm going to be far more inclined to actually carry this than I am to carry that. But how do these lenses both compare in the great outdoors? Well, this morning before coming to the brewery, I actually went to a local waterfall and did another comparison shot. One using the 1635 f4 Pro, which I'm going to put up now, and then the wider one with the 14 to 28. And I think yet again, the difference between 14mm and 16mm is far more than you would actually expect. So I think for landscape photography, it's very hard to justify taking the 16 to 35 f4 Pro over the 14 to 28, simply because the 14 to 28 is a wider lens. However, there is one big difference between the two of them. This one is f4 fixed aperture, this one is f4 to 5.6. Now, to be honest, for landscape photography, I don't find this a deal breaker at all, and I quite happily take an f4 to 5.6 for landscape photography, because the majority of the time I'm going to be shutting it down anyway to about f8, maybe f10, maybe even higher. But for wedding photography, I do tend to use this f4 Pro, especially for first dance, and it's always been shot at f4. So what this means is I can go from 16mm wide to the 35mm, which is incredibly useful for wedding photography, coupled with a flash, and the aperture's not changing, which makes my life far more simpler. However, I have my reservations about this because it does go to 5.6 when you start zooming towards 28mm. And apart from the fact that it's only 28mm as opposed to 35mm, because I do find the 35mm focal length far more useful than 28mm, but of course it's a fact that it's also slower, so I'm going to have to increase the flash power or increase my ISO. So yeah, that one is a bit problematic for me. But let's talk about the general construction and usability of these lenses. Now, the more expensive 16-35 f4 Pro is actually certified by Leica. It says so just there in text, and it may help to start explaining the actual price of the lens. Because whilst the lens is beautifully built and it has a really nice clutch mechanism for manual focus, which just feels beautiful, it does feel really nice, it doesn't particularly feel like it's built twice as good as the cheaper 14-28. You know, it's definitely got more weight, probably more metal in it, probably more glass. But apart from that, very, very similar. Yes, it does feel more of a premium product, but not enough to justify the price difference. So really, the way I'm looking at the moment, a lot of what you're paying for is the clutch, the Leica badge, and the fixed f4 aperture. And I suppose that's what you have to try and weigh up. Because with this one, for half the price, you get a wider lens, and you still get an AF/MF switch, and it's still nice enough to manual focus. They're both focused by wire anyway. None of them are true manual focus lenses. And I think really, I would call it a draw on this one, because I think they're both equally nice. Yes, the 16-35 f4 Pro has the edge, but not enough to justify the price bracket. And I think this is the whole struggle with this lens comparison. This is a £700 ultra-wide zoom lens, which is actually a very competitive price for what you're getting. This is a premium £1,500 16-35 f4 ultra-wide zoom. But I think the problem is, can it justify being twice the price of this lens? And I think the answer to that is no. For me, the only thing that's making me consider keeping this lens is being f4 fixed aperture. But that's not enough to justify such a big price difference. Image quality wise, I find both lenses really nice and very similar. I have no complaints about either lens, and either lens will do the job for me. And that's what I could say about probably most of the Panasonic lenses, because they're all quite beautiful, really. So really, if I'm going on cost, it has to be the 14-28. If I'm going on the end use of property photography, it has to be the 14-28, simply due to the fact it's wider. So I'm afraid the 16-35 f4 for me will be going. It's just too hard to justify such a big price difference. I think the reality is there aren't particularly any bad lenses nowadays. Most modern lenses are particularly good, but they do come at a price premium. And I think the 16-35 f4 is a prime example of that. And so I've got to congratulate Panasonic for coming out with the 14-28 for under half the price, but not under half the IQ and not under half the actual construction. So for me, I think the 14-28 is the way I'm going to go forward. I will miss the fixed f4 and I will miss the 35mm, but really having the wider 14 is a bit of a no-brainer for what I do. And I think the price difference makes it a very compelling lens. It makes it very difficult to recommend the 16-35 f4. Anyway guys, thanks for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've got something from it. If you have, please do give it a thumbs up. Maybe consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't. And I'd like to say one last thank you to the First and Last Brewery for letting me film this video here. It's been a great help. And I shall try not to get tempted to have a pint before I leave. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you again soon for another one.